Sunday morning, we dealt with vow 1, the vow of priority. And I said there that it wasn't just for, and I said this morning as well, we're not just speaking about marriages, but relationships. We spoke quite a bit about singleness last week and read some of the Bible verses celebrating the joy and all of that. But these were the two vows that we landed on last week, Sunday morning, is if you're married, is I promise that God will be my first priority. God is our one, and our spouse will be our second priority in that order. And if you're not married, single at the moment, single adult, I promise to seek the one. And then if you're hoping to be married one day while waiting for my two. And that was all. If you didn't listen to the podcast, it is available and online from last week. This morning, we're dealing with the vow of perseverance, so number 2 in the series. If you are or ever have been in a romantic relationship, I'm looking for a little bit of help. How many of you dated or are married to somebody that is fairly opposite to you in some ways or many ways? My wife's hand just shut up right there. So there's some things that we have in common that draw us together, but part of the reason that relationships are so fun and tricky is the fact that sometimes opposites attract. In many ways, parts of our lives are opposite. We're very different individuals. Now, to show you one of the biggest examples of opposites attracting, this was a photo taken 16 years, 5 months, and 3 days ago. If you don't mind putting it up, Kathy. And I think I know why you're clapping. You probably noticed 3 things between that photo and now. Is I have slightly longer hair. I don't wear specs anymore. And I'm very, very definitely married up. And I think that's the reason for your applause, is you're proud of me for marrying a girl as beautiful as Jax. This is an absolutely random fact, but I typed in to calculate the number of days between our wedding date and now. And how's this for remarkable? There are web pages that can do it all for you. As I typed in our wedding date up till today is exactly the 6,000th day of us being married. So that's just out there. It's a lot shorter than 50 years, but we're still here. What you can't see, the reason I say that is because what you can't see in that photo are the internal differences, character flaws, the deficiencies and needs and things that, let me speak for myself, I in particular we're different, the uniquenesses and the differences that takes a lifetime to figure out the dance, if you like, the steps, avoiding stepping on each other's toes. It's interesting when we come to the Bible in the very first chapter. In the story of creation, God speaks about how He created male and female, and it says this in Genesis 1, verse 27. So God created mankind in His own image. Just off that phrase, it tells us that God was there before any human being. That's an important thing to remember, because when we come to speak about human relationships, we look to an eternal God for His help. It says, in the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. So, in this verse, right in the 27th verse of the Bible, chapter 1, we're introduced to the idea of both difference and sameness. Difference and sameness. And what I mean when I say that is, when I look at the words male and female, He created them, that speaks of difference. It says mankind, which is like everybody lumped together, and then it says male and female. He created them. There are differences. We are wired differently. We can generalize on some of the things, but when it boils down to it, apart from just biological differences, male and female, designed by God, but different, and possibly in that is part of His whole incredible design that would bring us back to Him to say, God, help me figure out the opposite gender. I speak obviously as a male. Help me figure out when I was in my teenagers, help me figure out girls, they don't make sense. And I would guess that if you're a lady, young lady, older lady, help me figure out blokes, I just don't get them. Most of the time. That speaks to our differences, but you notice that the line before that speaks to the sameness. And it's a beautiful line, and it's a profound line. And it says this, in the image of God, He created them. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. The sameness is this, is that God created both genders in His image. And that is such a beautiful and profound and complex thought. But it says to me something like this, is that in maleness, something of God's image is reflected. But not all of it. And in, I don't know if this is the right word, so let me use femininity. In female, when God created women, aspects of His character were reflected to the world. And we hear about and sometimes joke about gender wars or gender differences. But actually, before the difference comes into this verse is the sameness. And because men and women are created in the image of God, it says to me that every single woman is worthy of respect and honor, and every single man is worthy of honor and respect, not because of actions, because actions differ, but because of the imageness. We created the theological phrase for that word is imago Dei, in the image of God. And in His complex, in His genius as creator, He forms man and He forms woman. And then He says, in the image of God, I've created them. So our sameness comes before our differences, but both of them are written into chapter 1, 27th verse of the Bible. We said a little earlier that often it's opposites that attract. I don't know about you, but you might have noticed that often when it's opposites that attract, those things that drew people to each other, over some time, opposites sometimes start to attack. Because our differences, while they are there, while they're part of the chemistry that draws people together, those same things later on down the line can become the things that provide the rub. Up front, she thinks this guy is so incredibly chilled and he's so laid back and he's so easygoing to hang around. And then after a few years of marriage, this lazy bum won't get off the couch and help me. The laid back coolness has now become the laziness, and he thinks to himself, wow, this girl is so organized. I can't believe God has provided someone like this in my life. And a few years into marriage, the well-organized and getting things done turns into, I can't believe it, she is so controlling, telling me what to do. And this is where some of the rub is. Now, just in case we think we're alone, the very first couple in the Bible, Adam and Eve, give us an incredible example of this. So chapter 1, God speaks about the sameness and the differences. In chapter 2, it tells a little bit of their story of how God created them and put Adam to sleep, separately created this woman, and Adam wakes up and says, wow! That's my paraphrase of the Hebrew in that Genesis chapter 2. Wow! In all the animals, there was no one suitable. And here, wow, thank you, God. She will be named woman. And their relationship starts. Okay, so that's Genesis 1, Genesis 2 we've looked at. Genesis 3, things go a little bit pear-shaped, if you don't mind the fruit pun there. And God says to them, don't eat. And anyway, things become a bit of a tangle, and there's temptation involved. And they eat of this fruit, both of them, male and female. And suddenly God arrives in the garden. And he starts looking for them, and they're hiding away. They start to feel a little bit ashamed, and he finds them, and he asks Adam, he says, what is this you have done? And this is Adam's chivalrous response. Genesis 3, verse 12, the man said, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it. I mean, talk about throwing your partner under the bus. This is like the original marriage couple designed to reflect God's glory. There, God's like, he knows everything anyway. And he's just backtracking. He's like, well, this woman that you put there, she got me into all of this mess. The attraction that he had in Genesis 2 has suddenly become an attack in Genesis chapter 3. And so we see this, I guess, in all of our differences and in the difference between genders and in marriage between husband and wife. And so this is how we've worded vow 2 for this phrase. And I'm going to unpack a little bit using some of this example behind me in a moment. But this is the vow. Is I promise to persevere in understanding differences while celebrating uniqueness. We're doing our best each week to make this beyond just marriage. So this applies not just in marriage, but if you are a single adult, I promise to persevere in understanding differences between the opposite gender and myself while celebrating uniqueness. I promise to persevere, and that's the important word, in understanding differences while celebrating uniqueness. I remember before Jackson and I started dating, how many conversations I'd have with my buddies. I had one friend, I still have this friend. It was his birthday yesterday, but we were at school together, and he was a very bright and philosophical kind of guy. So he would come up with different models every week of how the female makeup function meant, because we were absolutely at a loss on how do you interact with girls. Didn't help possibly that we were at an all-boys school, but there we were on weekends interacting with girls, during the week trying to figure out. And so I need to persevere. I need to keep on figuring things out, even when there have been miscommunications, misunderstandings, etc., etc. To live emotionally healthy lives in relationships, live emotionally healthy lives, and so not just relating in general, but also in marriage, requires perseverance. And this is an aspect, a quality that the Bible celebrates. It talks a lot about persevering. Now, you don't need to persevere if everything's going fine and according to plan. Perseverance is when it's a little bit tough, when there's misunderstandings, when there's misconnections, etc., etc. So the Bible encourages us to persevere enough, persevere in our faith, persevere in figuring out differences while celebrating uniqueness. And one of the things that differences do is differences to make us think I and them. And then we have generalizations that we try and heap into the they space. And so this is while trying to figure out differences, we're celebrating uniqueness. We're saying, what is the goal that God has put into each person around me? While I might not fully understand exactly what they're thinking or acting out right now, there's uniqueness, but there's also difference. So I'm going to persevere in figuring this out, and we're going to celebrate the uniqueness that God has. It sounds so easy to say it, doesn't it? Just there it is. It took 2 minutes to say all of that. But boy, a lifetime to work some of these things out. Now, in the fields of counseling and psychology, people develop numerous different tools to help us understand ourselves. So I'd like to say this. If we are not students of ourselves, it's very difficult to understand others. So we need to be students of the I. Steve Wimble's biggest problem in life is Steve Wimble. Heard someone say this: if you pick up a mirror and look in it, you will see, looking back at you, the person that has been involved in every bad decision you've ever made. My biggest problem is me. Your biggest problem is not somebody else, it's you. I need to figure out how I'm wired. And so there's different tools and different models, and I'm no expert in all of these, but as I learn and figure some of them out, or we have some progress on some things, Graham Kigan describes it. He says all of these different tools are like faces on a diamond, and depending which face you look at will give a different view of yourself and of other people. So there's no tool that is complete. But this, I've put buckets in here. It wasn't given like this to me. This, what I'd like to do for the next little while, is speak about understanding ourselves. Okay, so I'm speaking about persevering and understanding me. And then off the back end of that, we'll speak about when there's two sets of people, or multiple sets, or two people or multiple sets of people involved. So this particular tool refers to needs of the soul. Some people use 6 different needs. Some people have added 7. Some have added 8. And it's been in psychology, and it's kind of developed and shifted shape a little bit. But this is how I heard it, and so this is some of my thoughts and how I'd like to pass it on. The model goes like this. So this is one aspect of the diamond. But every human being has needs. We're wired internally with needs because we don't have everything that we need. And in this particular scenario, there are 6 needs of the soul. Over here, starting with the first need, every human being is wired with the need for certainty. That baby needs something. And from when we're that age up till now, wherever you're at in life, is we need these needs met. In other words, security. There's a part of our world that we need to know what's coming next. There's an aspect of our lives that we need to know that we're in control of things. As this unfolds, you'll see how some of these link together. But that we know what's coming, that we know there's some food, that we've got shelter that's at a basic survival kind of space, but that we've also got where we're going in our lives, our future, etc., that there's an aspect of certainty. Okay? And let's describe every need as a bucket in my soul. So let me use myself. These would represent 6 buckets in my soul. I have a need for certainty, some measure of security, knowing what's coming next, some things that I can control. But equal to that, we have a separate need that's called variety, uncertainty. So these 2 buckets sit in some kind of tension with each other, and variety speaks to the need that I have and that all of us have to have some things that there's a certain amount of change, that we're seeing new things, new places, new people, that is not just the same thing every minute of every day. So what's quite interesting about uncertainty or variety is that we don't all react the same to every kind of variety. Let me, for example, ask this question. How many of us like surprises? Would it be more accurate to say we only like the surprises we want? If it's something you don't want, we've got another word in the English language for surprises we don't want. We call them problems. So variety is coming, some of it of our own making, others is variety that's being pushed on us. So we've got a certainty and variety need. Interestingly, if all you have is certainty, you wake up at the same time every single day, you get fed the same breakfast at the same time, you do the same routine every single morning, you get fed lunch at the same time, dinner at the same time, you see the same people day in, day out, We've got a word for that. It's called being in jail. So that's when the certainty bucket, and there's no variety. Equally, if all you've got in your world is difference, variety, change of sleep time every night, being woken up at all different hours of the day and night, being fed water when you don't want it, and not given food when you do want it, etc. We've got a word for that as well. It's called torture. So they literally torture people by removing certainty and just giving them variety. So in a normal, balanced life, these buckets, if we know we've got them, if they sit relatively full, we feel just contented. And when any bucket is empty way down, we feel massive lack. I'll come back to that in a second. Alrighty, bucket number 3. Is that lectern in the way? Might be a little bit, but it's thin, so I'll be needing it just now again. Is the bucket of significance. This connection, thank you. Well, that was different to what I expected. That was a surprise. So these next 2 buckets, connection and significance. Connection speaks to the need that you and I have to feel connected to others in the world. I'm not just speaking about close romantic relationships, but it could be viewed as circles. Or know that there's people closer to me that know me quite well, people that are a little further away. We also got a need at different levels to be connected into what's happening into society. It's one of the reasons why social media works so incredibly well, is because human beings are wired with this need. Now, not everybody finds that need met through social media, obviously. Not all the need is met, but it's the feeling of connectedness. One of the ways of knowing how important this is to us is by using some of the opposite words. When this bucket is empty, we use words like isolated or alone or rejected. And it doesn't even need to be completely empty. It could just be emptied by 1 or 2 people, just a little bit, and we start to get those feelings. So this is a need wired into the soul, that we've got a need, we're designed to be connected. No man is an island. What's interesting about our connections is it's not just random to anybody, anywhere. Is the people that we're most drawn to be connected to in friendship circles and broader, is where we see some of ourselves reflected back to us. So the base need level, I like the me I see in you. And we hear it comes through in how we talk about people. If you are let's go back to the laid back guy, and you're really chilled, that will be something you would use as a compliment for other people who are like you. That other guy, that they are so laid back, so chill, they're up for anything, adventure at a moment's notice. If you're a highly structured person, your compliments of other people, they always arrive on time. Be like the highest compliment you could pay somebody. They always arrive on time and do exactly what they say they're going to do. But so we like what we see reflected. Equally, when it's not the me I see in you, then there's got to be some adjustments, and I've got to figure out how to connect through my differences. Bucket number 4, guess what that is? Significance. So I've got a need for certainty, for variety, for connection, and I've got a need for significance. Every one of us do. And this refers to the need that we have to know that who we are is valuable or unique in the world, and that what we do is valuable and unique. So that our work has purpose and our living has purpose. I got some of our 18 to 25s together, a group of about 10 or 12 guys and girls, and we're spending 6 lunches together, and we got speaking a little bit about millennials, and I'm giving to the generation that they've been born in, and there's obviously some general things that are said, but I was asking about some specifics, and one of the guys said this. He said, I think one of the greatest fears of our generation is that no one will know our names. No one, he said, we could die tomorrow and nobody would know we'd ever been on the planet. Just think about how that, at a significance bucket level, would impact what you do just to feel like I've had some impact on God's green earth. And that could be positive or negative things, just as long as the bucket feels full. I want people to know my name. And that again, I'm speaking generalizations, but there's this bucket to know that what I'm doing, that I have worth, I've got significance, but what I do has significance as well, that my work has some purpose and my life has some kind of meaning. Bucket 5 and 6. This is the basic human need that you and I have to grow. Isn't it wonderful, strange, or just amazing that just about every child has got a drive to do the next, what do you call them? Milestone. Thank you to all the moms. So that little bubba, as soon as it learns to survive, wants to turn. And then once it's turned, to roll. And then possibly to crawl and maybe to walk or sometimes crawl backwards, etc. And sometimes the milestones get a bit jumbled, but when those aren't reached, then we think, well, what's happened? What's wrong? Why do we think that? Is because every one of us was designed to grow. We were designed to progress. And in our physical development, we're designed to grow. A seed planted in the ground is designed to germinate and grow. There's this wiring that God's given into His world that people and things grow. I'm speaking at a childhood development sense. There reaches a stage in our physical development when we should stop growing, I guess, but that's a whole nother subject. At a deeper level, our souls and our spirits are also designed to grow. Our minds are meant to improve, or that we learn more and new and different. And our character is designed to develop. And when our character grows the wrong way, when it shrinks, that causes extra problems into our world. As we stumble our way trying to find character and internal development, that's how we're learning about the world. And then our spirits are also designed to grow in knowledge of God and our connection with Him. Gordon MacDonald, I don't have a Bible verse for this, but Gordon MacDonald, an author, he says, if our spirits keep on growing and you're a person of faith for some years of your life, towards the end of your life, when your body starts to shrink, he says it's quite possible that if you've kept growing in your faith with God, you would be a spiritual giant, even while on the outside certain things might be a little more tricky. It was this beautiful picture of how on the inside we're designed to grow. Then the sixth, it's my final bucket for this morning, is the idea of contribution. It's not just significance that people will know, but there's a basic human need to be contributing, to be giving, to be living for something, a purpose greater than myself. It's really interesting how this outworks itself. I beg your pardon. What do you think causes people to join the army in various countries and go off and risk their lives fighting? It's the idea that I'm designed for something greater than myself, freedom or independence or fighting for my country, whatever that is. Think of gangsters. For somebody to join a gang and put other people's lives at risk through self-destructive behavior, this bucket, as well as some of the others, would drive, part of that is I get to be part of something bigger. It might not be the correct or a healthy outworking of that, but this need is so wide into our hearts, so wide into our lives. We want to know that not just I count, my life has significance, but that I'm connected and I'm part of something that's bigger. I want to give. I want to give back, if you like. Once I know I've got food and water, etc., what that looks like differs, but it's wide as a basic need into our souls. Think, if you like, of something that you really, really enjoy doing. Something in your world that you really love to do. You find some fulfillment in those actions or activities. Chances are it fills at least 3 of these buckets. That when you're doing or engaged in those activities, it's filling a bucket of certainty and or variety, some connection, some significance, causing some growth and some level of contribution. And the things that we really dislike are often things that are pulling out of some of those buckets for various ways. I'm not saying that's healthy, just we are so driven by our internal drivers, these buckets, that in many cases people would be willing to break the law to get a bucket filled, reach some level of significance, some kind of connection. It's really, really important. We'd be willing to lie to ourselves. Some people, you might be dating a guy or a girl who's abusive. What keeps you staying in those kinds of relationships? Well, it's fulfilling some needs. There's some certainty. I know what I'm going to get. There's some variety, a whole lot of surprises and problems. Sometimes we become used to our problems, and they become familiar, that we're willing to live with familiar problems, then trade them for new uncertainties. And it provides some form of connection. And so sometimes we're willing to lie to ourselves in our own brains to keep those buckets full, like these basic human needs that are there in our souls. Incidentally, this model was not originally designed as a spiritual model. What I find interesting is looking at some of these things and say, well, does that reflect how God actually made us? Because this word has authority over all of us. And what's really interesting is that I think, let me put my words in here, all of these buckets are wired into my soul and your soul ultimately to bring us to God. They're given to us by God to bring us to God. Because ultimately, as we said last week, He is the only one, capital O, that can fill these buckets beyond what any other human can be. So these buckets, this is written like code into our soul. It's the roadmap. If you haven't yet found your way to God or back to God, these needs are a roadmap. You know, in some of these movies, they're reading the map and then they see, there's a hidden code and it leads to the treasure, the buried treasure. These buckets lead us to the treasure, which is God Himself. Listen to what the Bible says concerning the certainty, my language, certainty bucket. Psalm 16. Lord, You alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. If I'm in You, I've got certainty. You're the water that fills a good chunk of my bucket. Considering this bucket, variety, Isaiah quotes God saying, see, I am doing a new thing. My lot is secure and I'm doing new things in your life and in your world. Connection. I am the vine, Jesus said, and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I remain in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, disconnected from me, you can do nothing. That verse speaks to significance as well, but what about this verse in Ephesians 2? For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. This drive that I have in my world, this drive, designed to pull me back to Him, He says, I actually have got something significant for you to do with your life. You get connected with me, and your actions will start becoming some of those good works. Let's figure this journey out together. What about the bucket of growth? It says, from Him, Christ, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. Final bucket, Acts 20:35. Remembering the words the Lord Jesus Himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. You want to see some of the contribution bucket filled? God says it's more blessed to give than to receive. Do you understand some of this? Is this starting to make some kind of sense? Now, let me add two things into this model. First of all, is that we don't all have the same size buckets in each area. So, Jack's very kindly bought me some different size buckets. If I could have these ones here, thanks. Thanks, Joris. So let's say that your desire for certainty is rather higher than some of your other buckets. You like to know exactly what's happening, be in control. You've got a 20-liter bucket there, not just a 10-liter bucket. It's possible that your variety bucket might be a whole lot smaller. It's like, I like a little bit of change now and then, as long as it's on my terms. Wouldn't like to be in jail. That sounds a little bit too boring, but I just keep the change. Now, some people have it the other way around. Sheesh, what a boring thing to drive to work the same way every day. I just need an adventure. What is coming at me today? Okay, so let's keep them as we were. Then some of us have a very high connection bucket. Could I just use one generalization? And it is a generalization, but often ladies have got a much higher connection bucket than guys. We're not speaking right and wrong, wiring. We'll come to guys in a minute. So it might be, let's just leave it like that. So a guy would think, how on earth could she go and spend a morning with friends having coffee in 3 different coffee shops with 3 different sets of friends, and she gets home at lunchtime and just feels like she had an amazing day? You, on the other hand, would feel absolutely overflowed with connection. I'm speaking to guys if you did that. So some people have a much bigger connection bucket, and I'm not, just keep going with my analogy, don't lose me along the way. Some have a smaller significance bucket. All of us have it, but it might be a little 5-liter bucket, 2 liters. Whereas other people might have the 20-liter bucket there and the connection bucket. And boy, I wake up every single morning just, where am I going? Goals, targets, shoot the lights out. We are being significant. And the person that's this way around says, gee, that sounds tiring. What about the poor people who've got to work with you? Growth, contribution, different levels, buckets as well, but these are my 4 buckets that I've got this side, okay? So part of knowing who I am is figuring out my different buckets in different circumstances at different times. These buckets all can be full to overflowing, and they can obviously be empty. If this is just me trying to figure out all of these buckets, imagine adding another person in a romantic relationship with all of those expectations into the same part of the world. Much easier to take a selfie than to figure out the buckets of need. And so there comes, now how am I going to work these buckets around? There comes person A with those size buckets, and they start dating person B with those buckets. By the time, let me, if I could borrow my, I've got plastic water here. Thanks, Yoris. So I'm going to switch it around so it looks like this. Steve likes a fair deal of certainty. Let's give me a 10-liter bucket. I start dating an amazing lady who's got a 20-liter bucket of certainty as we figure it out. My bucket for variety might not be 20 liters, but it'll work for the sub. But I've got a higher appetite for variety than she does. Okay? So we start figuring out we're doing some things together. This is life. This is events that are certain and secure. By the time my bucket of certainty is like, we tapped out now, everything has been lined up, her bucket is only 60% full. On this side, and this has been a little real revelation for us, is that by the time we've met some new people and eaten some different kinds of foods and been in different places. Now, I'm no Ian Geordie. I need to put that up here. That guy got a 50-liter bucket for adventure, and But once I've got that far with variety, the bucket isn't quite full yet, and I might come up with a brilliant suggestion like, hey, why don't we do such and such with so and so? In her world, she is thinking, now we didn't have language for this for a number of years. In her world, she's like, are you crazy? But because she's much more Christ-like than that is, I'm not sure I can handle that anymore. And like, but we're called to do all this stuff and this and she's just feeling completely overwhelmed. We now have language for this on good days, and we have a lot of great days. And our language goes something like this: my variety bucket feels like it's overflowing. If your variety bucket isn't yet full, please feel free to go and do something with other people that just gives me a chance. And that's not said in anger or rage. It's just she can see I've still got some gap. And I can understand, boy, whatever, that overflowed. It's not about right or wrong. It's about wiring and differences, celebrating uniqueness while figuring out differences. With connection. Now we're the other way around. Let me put that bucket in there. Is in terms of Jackie's ability to connect and engage and have long conversations, etc., etc. She's a lot better, higher capacity for that than I do. But on the significant side, the feeling of I want my life to count for something. God just wired me with a much bigger bucket than He wired her. Whatever side, I'm not. Some of you are just feeling like so sorry for me getting myself into. This isn't about trouble, because I feel like I'm in the spotlight. What happens if we don't understand our own wiring is Jackie's significance bucket gets full, jam-packed, overflowing. Mine's only at 70%. I feel a little bit of a gap. I need to achieve a bit more. And she's saying to me, are you crazy? And I'm saying, are you crazy? Because we've got a gap, but she's 100%, I'm only 7%, but we didn't understand it. We didn't have language to talk through our different, this isn't about right and wrong. This is no excuse for sinful behavior. This is just wiring on how to do life better. I look at her ability to care and connect and do different things, and I think, wow, this is, I don't know how I can do that. And instead of saying, you're such a lousy person, you don't care, it's like, I've got a way of saying, you know what, my connection bucket, I think, is tapped out at whatever it looks. She does have, I do need to say this, a much bigger variety bucket on some things. One of those is decor and changing things around. So she will move things and change them. I have got no variety on decor. So I like everything in the same place every single day, know where to find the knives and forks, etc. And thank God that she has got an eye for beauty and an eye for making things look lovely, because if it was just up to me, it would be a pretty boring world that our family would live in. So as we figure out these buckets and ourselves, and can you see the difficulties and the stresses? Imagine adding children into that. And having a child born with a 50-liter bucket for variety with parents that have only got 20-liter buckets. Or the other way around. And it's like, no wonder we need God's help. Now listen to what, this is the final verse for this morning. Ephesians 4, verse 1 and 2 says. I hope that this has made some kind of sense. He says, as a prisoner for the Lord then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Live up to the calling. Don't stoop down to culture. Live differently, think differently. And then he says this in verse 2. He says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. That is such a profound verse. Incidentally, that's not in a chapter on marriage. That is written between Christian believers. But it's profound. So this is for all relationships. I'm speaking this morning between male and female, and specifically use the example of marriage. But he says, be completely humble and gentle. I arrive with my needs buckets, and I'm willing to do just about anything to have them filled. We all are wired like that. And then he says, be completely humble and gentle. I said, just back off a bit there. We are different. What does your significance bucket and your connection bucket and your variety and your certainty and your contribution and your growth bucket, how it differs from mine? Let's work it out. Let's try and figure things out. You do not need to, I'm taking the phrase there, be patient. If everybody's doing everything the same, we all agree, high five, get along fine. You don't need that line in the Bible. Paul writes lines like that because he knew you and I would be reading it. Be patient, he says. And then he says, bearing with one another in love. And when our emotions get up, and when we get frustrated, we get a little bit angry, we get a little bit hurt, that is one of the first things that goes, is we stop bearing with one another. We just want to wipe tables clean and deal in general, and because we want those buckets to feel full. And then we go back to the verse, bear with one another. And one of the ways we can bear with one another is we try and place ourselves in that person's shoes. Whoever they are. This is way broader than marriage. Can you see that? Put ourselves in that shoes and say, which buckets are empty that's making that person behave in some of that way? Maybe because I've got such a high variety bucket, I sprung what I thought was happy surprises on them. Hey, we're going away for 3 weeks to an undisclosed destination. Bring your passport. But the person that I'm saying it to has got a variety bucket like that, and certainty bucket. They want to know months in advance, so they can plan and prepare and pack, etc., etc. Bang! We went on one holiday, stopover for 2 nights, on our way to a destination. And I was so looking forward to it. I had built myself up for this for a few months. I was so excited. And when we got there, we had 2 really difficult days of marriage. And so we were in this exotic location. But there wasn't much exotic about our connections. But using some of this language, Jack said the reason I think I didn't enjoy that as much as you hoped I would enjoy it is because we have been traveling a bit over that period. And actually, I don't like leaving my boys that much. And so it's part of that certainty bucket is a little bit empty, and my variety bucket has overflowed. Oh, okay, we can figure it out. I can see that's given us new language to approach different things. And vice versa. When I'm tapped out on some things, she can say, my bucket has overflowed. And she's got some grace, and she says, well, let me jump in and let's see how we can help. And I really appreciate that. And thanks, Jax, for that we can figure some of this out together. But that's what it means to bear with one another, is in and after, through miscommunications, misunderstandings, is figuring out what is that person's needs that are slightly unmet. Equally, what are some of the needs I have that have overflowed or are unmet? And not in a demanding way, but in an honest communication kind of way, finding a language to be able to say, this is where I feel I'm a little empty, or this is where I feel I'm overflowing. When we start demanding things as our right, that creates an unhealthy relationship again. Incidentally, this verse does not imply that I should just keep quiet with my feelings and with my needs. Just bury my buckets because then everything will be happy. Because that person is so demanding on their buckets, and then please don't misunderstand this. It says bear with one another. It's not just one way. It's bearing. For me, healthy relationships involve honesty. It involves speaking up, figuring out these things. And when I speak up in a way that helps us move forward rather than moves backwards. Does that make sense? We are also dealing with such a wide variety of people. I can't possibly comment on every different kind of situation that I've seen or heard. But this is an overall model to help us become more Christ-like and to help us persevere in figuring out differences while celebrating uniqueness.